we are about to have an interview with Dean Politopoulos. I have to look at the name because it's a long, wonderful name. And Dean is the former communications person for YPD in Yonkers. He was also a cop himself, and if I'm not mistaken, you left that position as a lieutenant, correct?
Correct. I retired in August of 2023 as a lieutenant out of the police commissioner's office.
Okay. Then after that, he put on another hat, and he became the voice of YPD, and now he's got a third hat on, and he's running for president of the Yonkers City Council. So after a rather extensive and diligent profession in law, why do you want to do this?
That's a great question, Ardina, and it's a great question because it's one that I've given a lot of thought to, because I wanted to be able to articulate this to my friends and to my family and to the public as a whole. And the best answer is the simplest answer, is that I still enjoy helping people. I want to help people, and I want to feel useful. I feel I have a good knowledge of administrative and management and operationals experience here in the city of Yonkers, and I want to continue to put it to good use, and I want to continue to work with all the different communities and all the different community-based organizations that we've become familiar with over the years and still do good. My background is in administration and management and operations, so I love this city, even though I've worked for an agency and I've since separated from the agency. If I can still do good, I still want to do good. And I think government is still a place, where a lot of good can be done. So I want to be useful. And I also want to be part of the system that makes the decisions for the communities and the neighborhoods we live in. You look at government, whether it's local government or state government or national government, and you see a lot of divisiveness. You see a lot of unprofessional behavior sometimes, and so and it begs the question. How many times have you asked yourself? I could, maybe I could do that, or I can, try to do better, or I have things I contribute as well. So now that I'm separated from the law enforcement world and I'm a private citizen again, I want to take that background and try to put a good use and hopefully be the person that can help make those decisions to help other people too.
This is a two-part question.
Yeah.
What works in Yonkers now and what doesn't work in Yonkers now that you feel that you could tweak a little bit?
So I would say that totality of the circumstances, especially when you compare us to neighboring jurisdictions or to other areas of the state, I think Yonkers does pretty good. I think we're on a positive track, especially when you look at some of our sister cities of our size, upstate New York. I don't want to name any cities, but some of the larger cities that are upstate. I think totality of the circumstances, we're doing well, but I think there are things that can always be done better, and I think there are things that we can improve upon. Areas where I would like to see improvement, and areas where I think I could do well in and bring my background and experience in, is being open and transparent and responsive with the community, right? That's something that we became very, very good at the police department, is being open and acknowledging exactly how things work and being able to explain it to the community and following up the community. So I'd like to take a lot of that experience and bring it to the other levels of government, right? I think there's a lot of areas that could benefit from leadership, places where people can take a stand and, do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing and not just for politics. In those areas, focusing on community and neighborhood and being a champion for the people and not having to toe a certain party line, right? And what I mean by that is, the state, at the state level and at the county level and also at the city level, we have Democratic supermajorities. So oftentimes the state will pass legislation or it'll pass rules that may not always be in the best interest of our communities and neighborhoods, but there is not a real challenge to that at the local level. So I think by having somebody in the opposite party, somebody who's willing to stand up and fight for the neighborhoods and communities to say, you know what, we don't want to increase our noise ordinance level. It's a bad idea. You know what, we don't want to legalize marijuana, or we want to opt out to the marijuana legalization. We think it's a bad idea. Or you know what, we don't want to be a sanctuary city. We don't want to allow migrants coming into a community. We think that's a bad idea. And to be able to challenge some of those things that are coming down from the state level that the Democratic Party, from the state level pushes down, I think would be beneficial to the city, and I think it would help maintain the fabric of our neighborhoods and our communities.
You brought up Sanctuary City, and we had Jim Nolan on a couple of episodes back, and that was one of the issues that we focused on, because Jim had written a letter asking that Yonkers cooperate, well, basically his district cooperates with ICE because of the threat of the President Trump, withdrawing federal aid to sanctuary cities. And Yonkers hasn't declared itself as a sanctuary
right.
city, but it's sort of a sanctuary city by default, because there's an agreement not to cooperate with ICE. So where do you stand on that?
So I am in full agreement that we should follow the law. I'm a former law enforcement officer myself, and I'm a big believer in following the rule of law. I think that's how, society is built, and that's how best practices, requires us to follow the rule of law. Specifically to ICE, and this conversation's come up in a couple of different places. I'm the product of immigrants. My parents immigrated to this country in the 60s, and they did it the same way a lot of immigrants who immigrated to this country did. They went through the prescribed process. They followed the rules. They didn't break any laws, and they followed the steps that they had to follow to become a legal citizen in this country. Raise the family, hard workers, American dream. There are a lot of hardworking illegal immigrants in our community. Right? And this is a federal problem, and it's going to require a federal solution. I'm very concerned, though, about the small subset of illegal immigrants who are committing acts of violence in our communities and in our neighborhoods. And for those people specifically, I am in full agreement and full cooperation that ICE should use every tool necessary, and not just ICE, but law enforcement in general, the government in general. If there are people committing acts of violence in our community, we need to use the tools and resources available to us to remove them from the community. And that includes ICE removing illegal immigrants and deporting them from the country, right? Because you're breaking a law coming here, and then you're coming to our neighborhoods and communities, and you're continuing to break laws to victimize people who are living here. And we just can't have that, we just can't have that as a stable society. Now, the much larger population of illegal or undocumented immigrants who are living here, who are not committing acts of violence and who are not, committing crimes, and they're just looking for a better way to life. Eventually, there will have to be a federal solution to a path to citizenship that will require some sort of, getting in the back of the line from people who are here doing it, following the prescribed process, paying their dues, paying their taxes, paying any penalties that they have to pay, and getting onto the path of legal citizenship. That's not something that the city of Yonkers is going to fix. That's not something that any local jurisdiction is going to fix. The federal government's going to have to figure out how to handle the 20 to 30 million undocumented population that's here. Specifically to the ones who are committing crimes, specifically to the ones who are victimizing our neighborhoods, specifically to the people who are coming here and doing bad things, absolutely. ICE should find them, investigate them, arrest them, and deport them from the country after they've met whatever legal obligations they have to meet here. We've often heard, and not to get dualist, with the Democratic side of the House, but we often hear people on the news and the media, politicians saying nobody's above the law, nobody's above the law, nobody's above the law. Well, that includes everybody. That includes people who've come into the country illegally, and especially those who are breaking the crimes here, who are breaking our laws and continuing to commit crimes in our communities. So they're not above the law either, and there's a prescribed process, to handle them. I'm looking at the news just today and yesterday, and you see what's going on in Los Angeles. And to me, where is the leadership there, of the elected officials? It's almost like, you get a lot of elected officials and a lot of politicians who like to talk tough and act tough, but when you actually have to take action and you actually have to, take measures to safeguard the people in your community, it just seems this is, where they disappear, they drop the ball. What's happening in Los Angeles, shouldn't be happening. I don't think we'll see something like that in New York, and I don't think we'll ever see anything like that, hopefully, in the city of Yonkers. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this. There are laws on the books that have to be followed, that have to be enforced. Nobody's above the law, nobody's exempt from the law, and we just all have to follow the rules. That is the foundation of our country. It is the foundation of Western civilization. We are a nation of laws, and we don't make exceptions to that, for ideological purposes.
Yonkers is basically, the voting population of Yonkers is basically Democrat. Now, do you think that you will begin to see some crossover votes in your favor based on what's happening in the country right now? I mean, nobody ever thought that Trump would become president, but a huge portion of the people who voted him in were crossover votes from the Democratic Party because they just didn't like what was going on in the country. Would that same effect happen in this particular election?
I think so. So this election is, it's a very local election. The race for City Council President, is the highest office that's being nominated for this primary in the November season. I do think you'll see some crossover, right? Because I think when you come to a local elections, it's less about whether you have a D or an R in front of your name, and it's more about, is this somebody who can do, who knows what they're doing, is a good fit for the job, can connect with the community, and can help solve problems. And if there's one thing I learned campaigning and running for office for the first time in the last couple of months is that, as diverse as Yonkers is, and as, we have so many different neighborhoods, a lot of the issues are the same. If you go around the city and you talk to a lot of different people, they pretty much all say the same thing, to a certain degree. It's quality of life, it's public safety, it's their Con Ed delivery charge, it's taxation, it's schools, it's parking, it's traffic, it's, flooding issues. It's a lot of the same issues wherever you go, around the city. The question is what, is government doing about it? What are we doing to, to help our residents, live here, work here, play here, thrive here? Because ultimately, I think that's ultimately the responsibility of government at its core, right? Is to create those conditions that maintain and increase your quality of life, that maintain and increase public safety, and then set the conditions for people to be happy and for people to thrive. Right? If government really masters those basic services, then everything else kind of falls in place. And then people want to come here, they want to live here, they want to move here, they want to raise a family here. There's always been a lot of talk about development in Yonkers and overdevelopment in the downtown area. And, and I said this at a couple of the candidate forums, development is not a bad word. If done correctly, if done smartly, if done with focus, development is a good thing. It can benefit the city, benefit our community, as long as it's being done through the lens of, what are we doing, what are we using this opportunity to help the people who live there, right? So, for example, we'll use the MGM casino, for example, right? MGM's coming, they're looking for the gaming license. They want to invest a lot of money. Okay, great. We're going to use them, though, to, upgrade our infrastructure for flood mitigation. We're going to use them to, fix up Yonkers Avenue, change some of the traffic patterns, update the traffic lights that are in the area, and potentially with the community benefits package, buy the Lincoln Park Center over there and turn it into a library and invest in the community, right? So if you're doing those things, then the development is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you're committing to improving the life of the people who live there. And I didn't even mention the addition of the extra second precinct police car, which is the biggest thing in that area. And then you get to other places like Warburton Avenue and the downtown area of the city, where you have all these big buildings going up, but the roads aren't getting any wider. You're not magically getting any more parking spaces, at street level parking. So we have to make sure too that we're looking at the impact to the neighborhood and to the impact in community, and make sure that we have the resources in place to address it. It's a balance, right? I think everything is a balance, and everything has to be done within reason. And if it's done within reason and done within balance, then I think it's okay. And I think if people hear that, right, going back to your question, I think if people hear that and they say, okay, what, that makes sense, I think they're just looking for somebody that is going to work hard for them, right? And I don't think it matters if they have the word Democrat or Republican in their name. I think they just want to know that there's somebody that they can trust, somebody that they can talk to, somebody that is going to read a 400 or 500 page budget and not just skim it over. Somebody that understands, legislative process and, how government works, and that, it's not just, the lip service on an interview, or at a candidate forum, that someone's actually going to go back and do the work. And I think if people do, if people trust in somebody, then I don't really think it matters if there's a D or an R in front of their name.
But speaking of that, if you win, you will be a small portion of a larger portion of Democrats.
Yes.
The Yonkers City Council. So, I mean, there's going to have to be a lot of
collaboration.
Collaboration. A lot of what they call a horse trading.
Yeah.
How is that going to work? You're going to have have some negotiating skills. Not that you don't have negotiating skills, but I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah. No. Listen, you make a great point. So, on one hand, I think generally speaking, people who run for office, elected officials, I think they're well intentioned. I don't think there's a lot of people out there who are running for office, who are bad intentioned people. I think everyone who runs for office, for the most part, they want to do good, and they want to do good where they live, and they want to do good in the communities. Now, people have different levels of execution. Some people execute well, some people execute poorly. But I think for the most part, people who run for office, are good intentioned. So, the group of people who are in the city council, I think, are generally good intentioned and well intentioned people. And I think given the right type of leadership, it's given somebody who leads by example, and given somebody who could be a servant leader and address and talk about all the issues, and, try to come to consensus on a lot of the topics, and have the conversation. And I'm not saying that facetiously, because you always hear people say that we have to have a conversation, but like if you look at the national level, right, you don't really see a lot of people having conversations, right? It's like one side is behind their brick wall over here, the other side's behind their wall over here, and no one's really talking. I think on the local level it's not really like that. I think on the local level, you really do work and build consensus with people, and with my background and experience and just knowing how the city works, I think I would have a good path to doing that. At the same time, I think it's also important to have somebody that is outside of the majority, outside of the supermajority, that can be a check and balance to some of the things that go on that shouldn't go on. Case in point, the city council last year passed the ordinance raising the decibel level, which really contradicts the basic definitions of quality of life. So something like that would have been challenged, or would have been more challenged by having another opposition voice on the council. And it's not just.
Can I interrupt you just for a quick second?
Yeah.
Speaking of that decibel level, if you become Yonkers City Council President, would you have that rescinded?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would propose legislation to have that rescinded. If anything, we should be going in the opposite direction, right? And that's what I said at one of the candidate forums is, we should be looking at ways, to mitigate, sound pollution. We were, at one of the candidate forums up on the northwest end, up on Warburton Avenue. Noise was, noise and quality of life was one of the topics of conversation, and the sound cameras, the question of whether we should install sound cameras in the city came up. Just like you have red light cameras, there are certain devices out there for sound cameras, and we spoke about that a little bit. I live right off the Bronx River Parkway. Yesterday or the day before, I was knocking on doors over on Grassy Spring Road, which is right near the Springbrook Parkway. And it was the same thing, right? You get some background noise from the highways, but it's really, the motorcycles, that are zipping by, that are waking up, thousands of people in the middle of the night, or, those cars go by with those gunshot mufflers, right? And there are things that government can do to help mitigate that. A lot of it's on the enforcement side. Some of it can be, can potentially be handled with new legislation. But I'm also a big proponent, too, of, the solution isn't always passing a new law. Politicians love passing laws, but, laws are just words on a piece of paper. It's actually the people doing the work, to enforce the laws, or, the code enforcers, the DPW guys that are out there working, that actually have to do the work that improve your quality of life, right? It's not just, writing a couple of paragraphs on a piece of paper. You actually need people to go out there and do the work, whether it's, the mitigation itself or correcting the behavior or enforcing whatever needs to be forced. So a lot of those issues, have to be done in partnership, with the mayor's office, which is the executive branch, right? With operations on the city side, with our partners on the county level, and just, going back to the police thing, for example, motorcycles, on the Springbrook Parkway, right? You need local police, county police, even state police to get involved. You need partnership with your county partners, and you need a period of enforcement. You do that a couple of times in the summertime, and that's how you really stop the noise. It also doesn't help, our proximity to New York City, is you often get a lot of passing traffic. From the large number of people who live just south of us, so it's usually not just residents, that are perpetrating these quality of life offenses. It's usually people outside of jurisdictions, but there are ways to address a lot of it, not all of it. You're never going to stop every car from annoying somebody, for the remainder, that you live in Yonkers, but there are ways to tamp down on it. And it's not just loud noise, right? It's issues in the residential neighborhoods too, that affect quality of life. Just today I was talking to somebody in the, in the Gilmore Road section of the city, and they were talking about, one of their neighbors, right? And every weekend they pump up the music too high, he didn't do anything, and, he let it go, finally had enough. He called the cops came. As soon as the cops came, the noise went down. As soon as the cops left, the noise went back up. And then the police had to go back and they had to issue a summons. And this is, part of this is daily life of living in the city. But the way, to ultimately mitigate that stuff is through, enforcement operations, either on the police side or on the DPW side or on the fire side. And going back to what I was saying before, that's why it's important, for the city to, to master, its basic services. And for the most part, I think Yonkers does do a good job. I think, for, comparatively speaking, I think, what you get in the city for what you pay, is decent, except the school system. I think we can see improvements in the school system, but, then you get into the conversation about additional funding from the state and so forth and so forth.
Okay, well, speaking of quality of life, the residents of Homefield are up in arms.
About the battery, the lithium battery?
Not literally.
Yeah.
It's about the battery issue, which is,
Yeah.
this, as they say, it's starting to get legs, and there's going to be a community meeting about that. And where does that stand right now? Where does that stand in terms of it becoming reality?
Yeah. So don't quote me on this because I'm not, in government anymore. But I believe there's a moratorium on the battery, on the battery warehouse, and there's opposition to the building, and I don't think it's going to go forward. And as far as I know, there's a moratorium, and I don't think it's going to go forward. But again, I'm not an elected official. I'm not working in government today, so don't quote me on that. But that's my understanding, is that it wouldn't be going forward. And honestly, I wouldn't want it to go forward. You know what I mean? I mean, I wouldn't want a lithium battery plant in my backyard. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want a lithium battery plant in your backyard, right? And that's really been the real lesson, running for office for me, is that, and everyone, knows this, inherently, but, just to have it voiced from talking to so many people, is that, I live here, you live here, other people live here. The issues that you deal with are the same issues that I deal with. Just like, whether it's, traffic or reckless driving on Central Avenue, your experience is pretty much the same experience I'm having. Quality of life and noise issues, what I'm dealing with is the same thing, my neighbor on the Sprain roadside is dealing with too. And the same thing with the lithium battery power plant. I wouldn't want it in my backyard, and, if that's good enough for me to not have it in my backyard, then I know that's good enough for my neighbors. Right. And I think, that's a little bit of the difference you see, philosophically when you look at parties, and I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, but lots of times, with the more liberal side of the world, you'll see them, passing, legislation which is ideological as long as it's not in their backyard. Right. What are they called? The NIMBYs, right? Not in my backyard. Right. And like I use the marijuana legislation, as, kind of as an example of that. Right. When, if you own 2 acres in Scarsdale, it's very easy to say, let's legalize marijuana, but if you're living on Hamilton Avenue or Elliott Avenue and, you're an older person and you have to, walk past 20 buildings and 15 stoops to get to your house, and this is all you're smelling all day long, like, who's looking out for that person, and I think that's where government, kind of has to say, like, let's do what's best, for the people that are living here, not just, what we think is best.
But playing, again, devil's advocate, there are people who would say, yes, but a marijuana shop would bring in more tax revenue. It would probably attract more people to come and live in Yonkers, and basically, it would stop, or it would not stop, but it would help stop drug crime.
Right. So let me separate those issues a little bit, right? So as far as the taxation and the benefits, I don't know if we're there yet. I would have to read studies and so forth to see if any of that's actually come to fruition. What I will say this is we don't need another vice in society, right? I think there have been enough studies to show that the marijuana that's today is not the same marijuana from the 1970s and the 1980s. The weed today is a lot more potent. It's a lot stronger and different. There's also studies that have shown that you can get addicted more quickly. It's more damaging to your health, and if you have mental health issues, it can it can draw it out sooner. Especially certain types of paranoia and schizophrenia. Now, I'm not a doctor, right? These are just things that I, that I read online. But, I don't need to be a doctor to know that this is something I don't like, and I don't think it's good for the neighborhood, and I don't think it's good for the community. As far as the criminal justice and the social justice aspect of it, I think legalizing the marijuana, was kind of like trying to fix a problem at the back end, to prevent stuff on the front end. But I don't really know if that's the right answer. My intuition and my fiber just says that this is not a good thing for society. As much law enforcement as you want to throw at it, I'm sure you've probably seen people smoking weed in a car, people driving, while smoking, and, cars driving by, and the fumes are coming in. So, it's just one more vice, one more bad thing on the road. I know a lot of proponents, of this will compare it to alcohol and say that, it's safer than alcohol. And just as addictive as tobacco or less addictive, whatever the comparison is, but I still think there's a difference, right? I still think
marijuana dispensary on, I believe it's still on Main Street.
I'm not speaking about marijuana. I think medical marijuana has a place in society, especially people who are in chronic pain, especially as an alternate means, to opioid pain relief. So I think medical marijuana definitely has a place. What I'm talking about is do we need 22, 23, 25-year-old kids getting high every day just because they can now? You know what I mean? Like, is that the path? Is that the key to a productive society? And again, I'm not trying to draw a line against the people who use this stuff and enjoy this stuff, on their own. I'm just saying it doesn't, we made it too permissible as a society, and I don't think it's good for families. I don't think it's good for community. I don't think it's good for neighborhoods. I think the negative aspects of it outweigh whatever positive aspects are for it, and I'm not for it. If I was on the city council, I would have pushed to have opted out, as a jurisdiction. And I don't even, and it's funny because I want to look up a lot of the jurisdictions that did opt out, up the Hudson, the Hudson River communities, because I have a feeling, a lot of our more socially left friends, in a lot of the towns up in the Hudson River probably did opt out of this. You know what I mean? So, are the politics matching, the NIMBY politics? I don't know.
Speaking of well, forgive me for I'm going off on a tangent here.
No, not at all. I enjoy talking to you, Ardina.
What, in your opinion, across the board, what is the greatest common denominator between all of Yonkers, irregardless of party, locations, ethnicity? What's the common denominator?
Quality of life.
Quality of life.
Quality of life. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you live on the east side or west side or north side or south side, whether you're from, the Irish part of McLean Avenue or the Italian part of the Second Precinct, or if you're black or Hispanic, white, Jewish. At the end of the day, I think people want to come home and they want the quiet enjoyment of their home and their space. I think they want to be able to leave their home and feel safe. I think they want to be able to get in their car and not feel that they're on a racetrack. And I think they want to be able to send their kids out to the store and not have to worry about them. I think those basic things, right? Those basic things that I, concern myself on a daily basis, that you do, that everybody else does. I think that is what unifies everybody, whether it's Yonkers or, any municipality, but specific to Yonkers, doesn't matter what neighborhood you come from. I think people want a good quality of life. I think they want public safety. And I think they want to live someplace that they can call home, and they're not scared to leave their front door, and they like where they live. They can enjoy the stores. They can enjoy the public spaces. They can go out on the sidewalks. They can talk to their family. They can talk to their friends, and they can have a good life, right? And I think that is ultimately what government's primary responsibility is. Every choice, every decision government makes should be made through that lens. How does this improve? How does this benefit the people who live here? Ronald Reagan said a long time ago, right? Every dollar that government spends is a dollar that, we've taken from you, right? Government doesn't generate wealth. Government, takes money from you, residents and taxpayers, and it spends it, on residents and taxpayers, right? So it's got to be done efficiently, effectively, smartly, and it's got to be done with the utmost respect, to the taxpayer, because, that's the job. That's government's job. The government's job is to work for the people, to serve for the people. I know you've heard that lots of times, and I know politicians, say it all the time, but it's true, and I believe it. And, every decision that government makes should be made as, okay, is this, are we doing a good thing for this neighborhood? If we put this building in Southwest Yonkers, are we helping or hurting the people who live there? If we want, MGM to get their license and to build, is this going to help or hurt? And I think as long as we ask ourselves those questions, and I think as long as we do the homework, speaking to the residents in the area, engaging the community, neighborhood associations, doing our research, making sure we do best practices, as long as we do the best we can within good reason, I think that's, I think that's a lot you can ask for government. And for the most part, I will say, having worked in government, I would say for the most part, a lot of these things do work. Can they be better? Absolutely. Can they be made more efficient? Can we leverage technology? Can we, make our civil service laws a little bit different, when it comes to merit-based hiring and so forth? You can always make things better as time progresses and as new technologies come out and new processes come out. But at the end of the day, it's about having the good intentions of wanting to do good, and it's about executing and trying to do good, following up to people, talking to people, being responsive to people. I'm a big believer of that, and it was the one place, where we got beat up in the police department a lot is about being transparent with the community. You know what I mean? When something happens, you have to tell people, what happened, why, and what you're doing about it. And that's, kind of like been ingrained in our training now, and that, I think all of government can benefit from that. So I would like to bring, a lot of that, style of administrative execution to the city council. Having said that, I will do a caveat for anyone who's listening. The city council is the legislative branch of the city. It's not the executive branch, right? The mayor's office is the executive branch. He handles operations. The city council is, writes city code and primarily the city council is budget and zoning. So, it's not unlimited power. They specifically deal with, certain issues that are codified. But zoning is a big one. I mean, zoning is probably one of the most important things that any governing body deals with because, it's the fabric of where you live. The city council is going to determine, if a 20-story building with 160 units goes up in your neighborhood. They're going to determine whether, that the supermarket down the block turns into a hotel and vice versa. So it's not anything to be taken lightly. It's a very important position, and it's got to be done with input and feedback from the people who live in the area.
Speaking of zoning, what's happening with Chicken Island? It seems to be at a standstill, and there's some speculation that it may not be a done deal.
I don't have any inside scoop for you. I wish I did. I don't have any breaking news for you, but last I heard, it was still a target for development over there. But I don't know where it stands now. But I will inquire and I will follow up with you. I'll let you know what I find out.
Well, I shouldn't even bring it up because I don't have all the facts. But I'll just say that one of the rumors were, and I hate rumors, but one of the rumors was that the problem was getting permits. That the permit process, which is not a rumor, in Yonkers takes forever, and the developer was just kind of dismayed about how long it was taking to get permits to go forward with the project. I could be wrong. I don't know.
I don't know either, but I would agree with you. I've heard this from a lot of different people that the permit process is a little arcane. Could it benefit from new technology? Where's the delay, right? Where's the barrier in the permit process? Is it the environmental impact studies? Is it the engineering studies? I don't know. When I remember years ago, there was talk about putting the ball field in Chicken Island, and there was also plans, I believe, to build a hotel in the grassy knoll right there on the corner of Broadway and Prospect by police headquarters.
Yeah.
Yeah, once upon a time, and those never came to fruition. And then there was talk about Chicken Island about putting up a mixed-use, multi-story residential building with some commercial on the bottom. And I think that's what you're referring to now, right? That development.
My understanding was it was the totality of Chicken Island.
Yeah.
Which just, to put it in context, we're talking about the whole project itself.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. The last I remember hearing about was, that area is going to be developed and there's going to be a couple of, 12 residential buildings placed there. I don't know what happened to it. I don't know where they are in the development process. It's a big space. There's a lot of things you can do with that space. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, if it's done correctly, and if it's done through the lens of how do we help the people who are living here, how do we improve this area, because you can increase housing stock, right? You can widen your tax base. You can make sure that, the agreed upon, affordable housing is included. So, if you check off these boxes, these are good things, right? But it's got to be done, it's got to be done appropriately. Now, in part of that permit process, is that where the delay is? Is there some sort of negotiation taking place with the developer? I don't know. I can inquire, but I wouldn't know until, unless and until, I would get elected into office and I would have more insight into the background of that. But Chicken Island again is a perfect example of where you can do good as long as it's done the right way.
All these things cost money. And now on the subject
Yes.
of money and budget, the city of Yonkers has admirably pushed a green agenda. They've done a lot with solar, they've done a lot with using natural resources, but given a choice between putting more money into a green initiative as opposed to hiring more cops, what would you do?
I would hire more cops. I'd hire more cops because I think it has more of a direct impact in improving the quality of life and public safety of our residents. I'm not against green spaces. I'm not against green energy generally, but I think we need to prioritize, and I think public safety takes priority. I think I think there's a lot of ways where we can look to save money, duplication of resources, duplication of effort, but at the same time, if you look at the totality of our budget expenditures, I think, overall budget, I think police stands at somewhere at like 10%, fire somewhere at like 6%, DBW is at 4%, and then when you add fringe benefits, I think, they're less than 50% over, City Hall over. I think they're at about 83% on the operating side of the city budget, and then the rest of it goes towards the school side. Going back to what we were saying before, I think the most important thing for people is quality of life. That doesn't just happen, right? Like, you can't just say, I want to improve quality of life and snap your fingers or write a couple of laws and then poof, you have increased quality of life. Like, there are, people who have to go out there that have to work to improve your quality of life, right? DPW's out there, they're picking up garbage off the street, they're cleaning buildings, cleaning sidewalks, they're maintaining infrastructure, right? Police is out there, they're enforcing the laws, they're curbing behavior, they're making sure that people are, doing the things that they're supposed to be doing so they're not interfering with other people. Fire department is, obviously fighting fires, providing medical resources, inspecting infrastructure. All these things, all these pieces work together and they improve, and they contribute to improving quality of life. Green spaces and parks are part of that as well. And I would like to see, improvements in our green spaces. And I think, Yonkers generally has done an admirable job with a lot of their green initiatives, and to continue doing what we're doing to make sure that people have spaces to enjoy, and whether it's parks or sidewalks or the things that connect the pieces together, just to make sure that they're in good condition and people can enjoy them. But if you're asking me, parks before police or police before parks, I would put police before parks. About green energy as a whole, because this had come up in a conversation with somebody else, and this is probably more at the state and national level. I am for investing in green energy initiatives, but, and here's a big asterisk to it, right? If we really, 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 really want to impact climate change, if we really, really, really want to make a difference in global warming, in the increased rains, which are causing flooding problems all over the city. Every little bit helps, but the reality is, as long as China and India are building 20 or 30 coal power plants a month, the green energy initiatives in the United States will not be able to overcome that level of pollution creation. So this is a nation-state level problem that has to be addressed globally if we really, really, really want to make an impact. We've been talking about this as a country for a very long time. I think more seriously, we've been discussing it for the last 10 years, right? And it was about 10 years ago, right? There was a big effort to say, hey, we can't let, global temperature rise 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're not going to meet that goal. We're not going to meet that goal, right? And I don't think it's an issue of the Paris, Climate Accords, or, whether Yonkers is, creating green spaces, or whether Governor Hochul wants to, take your gas stoves away. When you have other countries on the other side of the world that don't care about any of this stuff at all, it's really going to be a really hard topic to control. Right? And then just going back to what we were saying a little bit earlier, because we're talking about green stuff, I read something the other day, how the state wants to make Teflon pans illegal. right? I don't know if you saw that in the New York Post. Because there are certain chemicals, in Teflon pans, that, could seep into the food or are unhealthy. But, going back to the whole marijuana thing, and I'm not trying to harp on the marijuana thing, but, why is it okay to say Teflon pans bad, marijuana okay? Like, if we're gonna govern, let's use a little common sense. You know what I mean? Like, just a little bit. That's all. And so, I think a lot of this is just being reasonable and, having a reasonable conversation with somebody, and if somebody thinks I'm wrong or if they want to, tell me why I'm wrong in the marijuana issue, I publicize myself on everywhere. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anybody and, talk, and maybe convince me why I'm wrong or maybe, educate me. Maybe I'm missing the facts somewhere. I don't know. But I think a big part of this too is, learning as you go along. And, I think it's okay to, for candidates and politicians to change their mind and, as they become more factually educated on something or more knowledgeable on something, I think it's okay to change your opinions and change your mind. But at the same time, I think, common sense really governs all. So I'm trying to bring a real common sense approach to this, being open, being transparent, and, having as many good conversations with people like you are, Dina, and just getting the word out there.
Speaking of the green spaces that we have in green spaces that we have in
Yeah.
Yonkers, there are a lot of complaints about those green spaces being taken over by homeless people, and homelessness has been a chronic problem in Yonkers. Apparently, I believe it's Yonkers bears the brunt of the largest homeless population in Westchester County. There are a lot of places in a lot of towns in Westchester County just don't have adequate homeless shelters, so they get shuttled to Yonkers. And in the vernacular, it ain't stopping. So how can that be handled? It's not as though the homeless population is going to reduce. It's increasing for a variety of reasons. It's increasing for a reason because the rent is too high and people are just getting priced out. So where are they going to go?
Yeah. So, I think a big portion of the homeless problem is also connected to, mental health related issues. I think a large number of the homeless population are people who have mental health issues or, long-time drug abusers, and, they're not seeking or they're not leveraging the resources that are available to them. Because there are resources out there, whether it's government services or community-based organizations, but a lot of, and I'm speaking from experience now because there are, we have individuals in Yonkers that we've engaged, 50 times, 100 times, 150 times. And, they just end up back on the street for any number of reasons, a lot of them mental health related. I would like to see a more compassionate approach to this. And by compassionate, I think if somebody needs help and they're not willing to seek it for themselves, or if they're not willing to go through the program, then we should have involuntary, we should have laws for involuntary, in place to make sure people are getting the help they need. Because the reality is this, Ardina, we can solve homelessness tomorrow if we wanted to as a society, but it would be mean and it would be wrong and it would be uncompassionate. You can pass a law tomorrow that says homelessness is a crime, right? And you can arrest everybody, put them in prison, give them their cot and their 3 hots, make sure they get their medication, give them a place to sleep, give them medical care, right? And then you would have everybody off the street and, taken care of. Now, obviously putting them in jail is not the right approach, right? Especially if they're in need of medical services. But at the same time, the approach which we've adopted over years and years now is just allowing a lot of the homeless and mental health population to just wander the street. I mean, I don't want my kids taking the subway in New York. You know what I mean? I don't know who's going to be the next person that's going to get pushed on a subway track, or some random person in New York, just getting punched in the back of the head or, stabbed. And you see those issues mainly in New York City, but they pop up in other jurisdictions too. And a lot of that is just, people who are in crisis or having a mental health episode. And, the police will stop them, EMS will stop them, they'll take them to the hospital. they'll spend 12 or 24 hours up to a maximum of 72 hours in a psychiatric institute, and then they'll be released and let go, right? And then other people in government or the homeless population themselves will be expected to follow up. But the problem is they never follow up, they never take their medication, and it becomes this cycle where you have, this population on the street that's just constantly engaged in the same type of behavior.
Brian,
Yeah.
just let me interrupt you for a quick second. Now, you're aware of the homeless shelter that's being constructed as we speak at the corner of 261st, 262nd, and Broadway
In the Bronx, yeah.
in the Bronx, which is it's 1 block from the Yonkers border.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of blowback from the community in Riverdale, which did not want that homeless shelter there. But there's going to be
Problems.
There's going to be some problems because
Yeah.
these people. I mean, the people that are there.
Yeah.
Supposed to be, I think, 100 men only. There's going to be some cross traffic because
Yes.
they don't have to stay in that shelter all day. So what will be done to protect the border, to protect the Yonkers border and the crossover
Yeah.
of people from that shelter into South Yonkers?
Yeah, so I need to get more current on what the current construction status is of what's
Westpac
happening.
has it, and Westpac is in
Yeah.
Westpac. I'm sorry, is it Westpac or West Hab?
West Hab. West Hab. Yeah.
West Hab.
Hab. Yeah.
Which is in Yonkers. It's a Yonkers-based.
Yeah, it's a Westchester County. It's a Westchester County based. It's a Westchester County community-based organization. So the direct answer to your question is that this is going to be a problem for the 3rd precinct. This is going to be a problem that law enforcement will have to deal with in the beginning, and they'll have to conduct targeted patrols of that area, and they're going to have to work closely with the residents who live there, and they're going to have to, get to know who the director and the administrator and the managers are of this, of this shelter, and, lay down the law with them and explain to them, like, we can't have members of your community coming to our community and committing crimes, or loitering, or, committing, acts of vandalism and so forth. And, the population that's there will have to be educated and be told, that, you cannot. I mean, listen, they shouldn't be committing crimes or committing acts of violence no matter what. But, from a Yonkers perspective, we need to take care of our own, and we need to take care of our community. We need to protect our residents in the southwest side. So immediately it's going to be a law enforcement issue. Longer term, it's a political issue, right? And that's where the city has to get engaged, whether it's, it's the mayor's office and the city council together, right? And, communicate with the people who are running this facility, whether it's West Hab corporate directly or whether it's the direct managers of this facility, and, put in some ground rules. Taking an adversarial position with the people who manage it, right off the bat is not the best course of action. The best course of action is to meet with these people routinely, to have a regular cadence, and to have open lines of communication. So when there are problems or there are violations, we can alert them so they can alter their procedures, alter their process, and they can start correcting the behavior on that end. Either way, it's going to be a problem, and it's going to be a potential for a problem, and the best way to address it is to have government attack it from all points of view, which is from law enforcement, which is from the administration, and and I don't know the answer to this. I'm assuming there was some sort of engagement with the New York City administration, about placing this facility here. I would also suspect that New York City did this on purpose because they wanted it as far away from the center of their, jurisdiction as well. So they put it on the border, right? Because to keep the home, to keep that population away from their center as well. Look, and is that fair to the people that are in there, right? I mean, isn't the whole idea of government and society is not to play cards, not to play hot potato, but to actually help the folks that are there, right? So we have to make sure that's being done too. Is West Hab doing their job? Are these men getting the services they need so they don't have to roam the neighborhood, so they don't have to find themselves in Southwest Yonkers, so they're not committing crimes or vandalism? I don't know the answers to those. I do know if I was in office, I would absolutely follow up on these things individually and come up with a plan to come up with a working plan towards a solution to attack this problem, right? I mean, that's what government is supposed to do. That's why people get elected, is because the people in Southwest Yonkers can't deal with this, or they don't know how to deal with it, or they don't want to deal with it, and they're looking for help. And that's where government has to come in and say, hey, we'll take this on, and we'll help you, and we'll try to figure out a way to make this work. Do you know when that's opening? Is that like on the verge of being opened?
It should open in 2026.
Okay.
2000. So it's not. It doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow, but it doesn't also
Yeah.
mean it's going to happen in a couple of years. So it's on the way, and you may have the new title of Yonkers Border Czar.
Listen, I would look forward to it. I wouldn't want that kind of shelter opening up in the city, and obviously I don't want it on the borders of our city. But problems do occur, and we have to deal with them, right? And that's government's job. I mean, the whole reason people get elected is to make the hard decisions. You know what I mean? And not to talk about politics, and not to, pander to any specific thing. I mean, the truth is we have good people who live in those neighborhoods, and they don't want a community of potential, bad actors living across the border. I mean, it is what it is, and we have to do everything in our power to help them.
Well, I mean, this we could go on for another half an hour or hour, but we won't.
Okay.
So,
I love talking to you, Ardina. I've always enjoyed our conversations. I don't feel like it's an interview. I feel like it's just a conversation.
Well, you're a reasonable man who may have the privilege of having an unreasonable job. But, the main thing is it's a common denominator that cuts across north, south, east, west Yonkers. I think that we all, as Yonkers residents, want the same thing, as you say. We just want to be able to leave the house and come back to the house in safety.
100%.
We want to be able to sit on our balconies or sit in our apartments or in our backyards without noise and music blasting, and just the mutual respect for each other. So that's my sermon for today. You have the final word, Dean.
So first and foremost, Ardina, I want to thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. I enjoy these talks with you. To your listeners and to people who are listening, I'm running for City Council President. There's going to be a primary election on June 24th, and then hopefully another one in November. I don't want you to vote for me because I worked for the city, or because I was in law enforcement, or for anything like that. If you think that I can do a good job, and I have the background and experience to do a good job, then I would ask you to vote for that. If you think somebody else has, then I would ask you to vote for them. I think that's probably the most wonderful thing about this country, right, is our free election process, and then everyone has a voice and everyone has a choice. So regardless, I think the most important thing, though, is to get out and vote. Because one thing I've realized getting into the political process is there isn't a whole lot of participation. There isn't a lot of people voting. So sometimes it's, and you see this, Ardina, right? It's always the loudest people on social media, who get the attention, or it's the people who shot the most, or it's the people who are, marching in the street, or whatever the topic is. But I don't think that's representative of the majority of people. I think the majority of people aren't far left, aren't far right. I think they're just center people who are looking for a good life of peace and quiet, and want to raise their family and want to live in their home, like Ardina said. And those are the people that, who are working hard, and they're raising a family and raising kids. So they don't always have the time to go out and vote, or they don't even, run for elected office for that matter. But those are the people that I want to represent the most too, right? The ones that are too busy to go out there and do this stuff for themselves. They're the ones who need, the representation in office. So, if you're free on June 24th and you're not on vacation and you're able to stop by the polls, or if you can do early voting, I would ask that, regardless of what you decide, you just take part of the political process, because, it's important to get as many people engaged and out there to vote, because, we're the ones, the elected official are the ones, especially in the local level, that probably have the most impact on your day-to-day lives. So it's really important to be part of that process.
And if anybody has any questions for you prior to voting, is there a way that they can reach you? Not that you want to be inundated with requests, but there are a lot of people out there that have legitimate issues that haven't been solved, and they want answers.
Yep. So Ardina, you may think I'm a little cuckoo, but I've put my cell phone number on every single mailer and every palm card that's gone out.
Wow.
So anybody can call me on my cell phone, 917-991-1223. I'll repeat it again. It's 917-991-1223. It's not a Google Voice number. It's my regular phone that, Ardina, you call me on. And anybody can call me anytime. If I'm available, I'll answer. If I'm not, I'll usually get back to you as soon as I can. Because I do think, and I mean this, that it's really a responsibility of elected officials to make themselves accessible and make themselves available, especially when they're asking people to vote for them. Realistically speaking, can I answer the phone call of 230,000 people? No, absolutely not. But I will try my best, and I will follow up with you, and I'll try to get back to you, because I think it is a responsibility of elected officials to communicate and to dialogue with the people that they're voting with, that they're asking to vote for them.
Accessibility is just so important, and with that, I guess we are done. And I don't think this is going to be the first interview. I think it'll be one of many. So best of luck to you, Dean, and thanks for being a guest on the show.
No, absolutely, Adina. Thank you, and I wish you and your viewers a good night.
Okay, we are over and out, and that's it.